Greetings, everyone. This year's annual GABV meeting is being virtually hosted in Minnesota. Minnesota is a global destination for business and commerce. We are home to the Mayo Clinic, one of the best medical facilities in the world, as well as the largest shopping mall known as the Mall of America. Minnesota also is home to more Fortune 500 companies disproportionately to a size of population. This year, we have sessions called Minnesota on the Map. These are short segments that will feature the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, the Science Museum of Minnesota, Global Minnesota, and Destination Medical Center. I hope you find these segments inspiring and educational, so please enjoy this first segment of Minnesota on the Map.
Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes, but our numerous bodies of water are just one of the state's features that make it special. Yes, it's cold here too, but the summers provide a respite from the frozen tundra and an opportunity to explore Minnesota's great outdoors. In short, there's a lot to like. Throughout this conference, we'll be featuring Minnesota Minutes, 1-minute videos that showcase what makes Minnesota special and why more than 5 million people call it home. So welcome. We're happy you could join us in the North Star State. Minnesota sits bordered by Canada to the north, Wisconsin to the east, and the Dakotas to the west. Iowa is our neighbor to the south. Minnesota was admitted to the U.S. in 1858 as the 32nd state in the Union. 5.6 million people call Minnesota home, with more than half of its residents, 55%, residing in Minneapolis and St. Paul, collectively known as the Twin Cities. Now for a little humble bragging. Us Minnesotans are lucky enough to have not only more than 10,000 lakes, but also access to one of the longest rivers in America, the mighty Mississippi, which divides Minneapolis and St. Paul. We also have the largest shopping mall in the country, the Mall of America. And there's no shortage of famous sons and daughters who hail from Minnesota. Bob Dylan, Prince, Winona Ryder, and Judy Garland were all born here. Minnesota has a wealth of diversity, too. We have the largest Somali and Hmong populations in the United States. So, there you have it, a true Minnesota Minute. We're so glad to have you with us today and look forward to what we can accomplish together during this year's GABV annual meeting.
Hi, I'm Steve Simon. I'm the Secretary of State for the state of Minnesota. Thanks so much for having me. I want to thank the Global Alliance for Banking on Values for inviting me to participate in this 2021 annual meeting. It's really an honor and it's refreshing, frankly, to appear before global leaders dedicated to a values-based approach in banking. So thank you very much. As Secretary of State for the state of Minnesota, among the biggest of my responsibilities is the privilege of overseeing business filings for hundreds of thousands of new and recurring Minnesota business entities each year. We're sort of the welcome mat for businesses all across the state of Minnesota. And I want to talk to you just for a couple of minutes about a development over the past 6 or 7 years or so that has the potential really to positively impact the world of values-based finance and investing. It's a new kind of business entity in the United States and in Minnesota in particular called a public benefit corporation, or PBC. Some of you are probably familiar with it, maybe others of you not as much. But I want to talk about that a little bit. Basically, a PBC is an entity, a business entity that is for profit, but that is also authorized to suspend its corporate assets in pursuit of a larger public benefit. It's written right into the DNA and the founding of the organization itself. And Minnesota was one of the relatively early adopters of the PBC model in the United States. So the PBC concept really started with the view that the modern business corporation is often trapped, or at least feels that way. The corporation is not a person, but it is made up of individual people. And those people want to make money, but they also want to do the right thing, or what they perceive to be the right thing by society. But the people who run those entities sometimes feel that they can't do that, or at least they can't do both at the same time, or they can't do both at the same time comfortably. Because they would either face blowback or rage from shareholders, and they might even face litigation and other downstream complications. But the question arose, what if there were a type of business entity that explicitly was allowed to do both things. One that operated for profit, but that could also be dedicated to one or more social or general missions that have nothing to do with making money. Actually, a mission of the entity would be one of those things. And these could be missions that might make the world a better place. That is the idea, and the reality is what we now call PBCs, or public benefit corporations. Now, some of you may be listening to this and may have some background knowledge about this and think, well, what is the difference between a PBC and a nonprofit? This sounds an awful lot like Amnesty International or the Red Cross or some other large multinational nonprofit. But there are some key differences between a nonprofit entity and a public benefit corporation, as we've discovered here in Minnesota. For example, nonprofits have no shareholders. PBCs often do. Nonprofits take donations. PBCs do not take donations. Nonprofits prohibit personal gains. PBCs don't. In fact, they welcome personal gain as one of the aspects of the entity. Nonprofits have to devote their resources to fulfilling their mission. PBCs have some flexibility. They can have first and foremost on the list making a profit or making money, but can also commingle that with a broader social mission. Nonprofits do not need typically to do periodic reports about how they're doing and whether they're advancing their mission, although they often do those on a voluntary basis. PBCs must do that. And you can go on our website in Minnesota and you can look at the dozens and dozens of annual PBC reports. They must do it. They must report on whether and to what extent they are meeting the mission. To what extent are they advancing the mission, the social or other mission that they have set forth in their founding documents? So for me, PBCs present, I think, an exciting possibility, kind of a blend of profit and purpose. And we've helped to pioneer that here in Minnesota. So I think a big question for a lot of people, particularly I would imagine those in finance, is can PBCs attract investment on a scale that would rival the traditional business corporation? I think it's too early to tell. It's such a new concept, but a really exciting one. But there are several examples of PBCs raising significant private capital. I'll just name a few. Companies like Kickstarter or Laureate Education. Ripple Foods is another one. And there's a long list of private equity investors with PBCs in their portfolios. Now, there are a lot of suggestions that PBCs could increasingly in the coming years play a constructive role in heavily regulated industries like cable TV companies or traditional infrastructure or energy utilities and even banks. Banks have been mentioned as among a subgroup that could benefit from this kind of entity. And in Minnesota, we just so happen to have one very prominent and distinguished PBC that I know you all know, and that is Sunrise Bank, a PBC, a member of this organization, GABV, and an innovative and responsible and respected corporate citizen and actor in our state of Minnesota. So you're familiar with them. I am as well. And I was privileged to be invited to give this presentation by them. They are an example of this system and this type of entity working and working well, not just for them, but for the state as a whole. So I think that PBCs could, as they evolve over time, provide some sort of compromise capitalism of the kind that many people, particularly young people, really seem to be craving these days. And I think PBCs are forcing a general discussion about money versus mission, which is positive and constructive. I think the bottom line for me is they show tremendous promise, and Sunrise Banks is one example of that living, breathing promise in the state of Minnesota. Now, I've been asked in just a couple minutes remaining for me to say a little bit about another area of responsibility that I have and that we have in the Office of Secretary of State. And that is we are the entity that runs and supervises elections in the state of Minnesota. And wherever you're from on the globe, you know that we just went through in this country a really significant presidential election. All elections are intense. Presidential elections are even more intense because of the stakes. But this year, all of those elections flowing from the presidential election were made even more intense by the fact that we were administering all this in the middle of a once-in-a-century pandemic. Tremendous challenges, the likes of which we have never faced in the history of our country. And so we knew very early on that we had to do things differently. We knew that public health had to be first and foremost in our minds. So one of the things we did in the state of Minnesota, which turned out to be the right choice, was to emphasize for voters their ability, an ability they had had for many years, to vote from home. Not just to go to a polling place on election day, but to really act to ask for that ballot to be mailed to them at their home. We set a goal of reaching 50% of voters. 50% was a reach goal, a stretch goal, to make sure that we could get about half of voters away from crowded polling places and scattered and in a comfortable position in their homes. We didn't reach 50%, we reached 58%. That means only 42% of voters voted in the traditional way, which is in a polling place that's designated for them on a particular day, election day. 58% did not. That made things safer for everyone, both the voters who voted that way from home and the voters who decided to go to the polling place, because there were far fewer people at the polling place. And wouldn't you know it, voters in Minnesota really leaned in. They felt more safe, they felt more confident, they felt more secure. So when everything ended in 2020, and there was a lot of drama that I won't get into, but when everything ended, for the third election in a row, the state of Minnesota, our state, was #1 in America in voter turnout, just shy of 80% turned out. And that tells me that people had a high degree of confidence. Now, there are some disinformation that persists for very ugly political reasons about the 2020 election in our country and in the state of Minnesota. But let me be clear. Every time that disinformation rears its head, my job, and I think the job of anyone in Minnesota, is to meet any disinformation or outright lies with truth. And here is the bottom line, and here is the truth about the election in our country and in the state of Minnesota. The 2020 election was honest, accurate, and secure. That is the truth. And those who persist in saying otherwise are leveraging those mistruths, often for unsavory ends. And we can't allow that to happen. We should be proud of what we've accomplished together in the state of Minnesota and nationally as to that national election. So that democracy mission of our office coexists quite nicely with the commerce duty of our office to be that gatekeeper or that welcome mat really for Minnesota businesses. I'm honored to do the work. I'm honored to be before you. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and good luck with your meeting.
My name is Mark Ritchie, and I have the honor of serving as the president of Global Minnesota. And I also serve as the civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army for the state of Minnesota. In my role in the past as Minnesota Secretary of State, I had the good fortune of being able to learn deeply about our state, the history, but also all the aspects of it from north to south and east to west. And I just love the opportunity to share, why are we so global minded? How did that come to be? And I think it goes back a very long ways. This is a state where there's a very special place called Pipestone, which has very unusual rock formations. And all of the Native American tribes from this whole continent use the stone from this one place in western Minnesota. So for thousands and thousands of years, people had come from the whole continent here, partly to get this stone to make peace pipes. So this is a very important component of the peaceful relations that had to be maintained. But also there was a recognition of the rich resources. There was copper mined in our region 2,000 years ago. The forests were both a place of flowers and botanicals and wood, but also wildlife and food. Our rivers, our lakes, our soil. This was a region that attracted people from all over the continent. And when Europeans began to travel across the oceans, and they came here down rivers and in incredible campaigns, taking some of the resources from this region, one of the most famous, beaver skin back for hats, but bringing world trade and commerce. And people began to come here and began to recognize the uniqueness of the place. Sometimes they were coming here to farm. Sometimes they were coming here to work in our logging camps. Sometimes they were coming here to develop commerce. But for what all the different reasons, they were people who knew the world and were bringing a kind of point of view. Some people came also because they were fleeing religious persecution and they were looking for freedom. So this large community of people that came to this beautiful place and began the process of creating a new society here at the headwaters of the Mississippi River and at the headwaters of the Great Lakes. We had a change around the time of World War I, when suddenly this region became part of an international humanitarian effort to feed particularly Belgium and northern France during the First World War, who were starving, and then helping to feed all of Europe all the way over to Russia through the early 1920s. And we began to see that we were connected to another part of the world. Many people here were coming from Europe at that time, but also that there was something that we now call humanitarianism, organized kindness, organized response to a human need. In this case, it was starvation and famine. But that was one part of the changing nature. It was another part was a recognition that war itself, civil wars and wars between nations, were so destructive in this modern industrial era, were so awful and so impossible to control, that we also as a people began questioning the sort of just a way that we just launched into wars, and began making a strong international case for beginning to look hard at those kinds of relations between nations. Secretary of State Kellogg from Minnesota with Foreign Minister Briand from France brought the nations together to actually create a treaty to ban wars of aggression. And in our state, we would celebrate that day. People were very aware. We began to have a whole community of people speaking out about the necessity of a new way of global governance. And one of our youngest governor ever went off to war in the Second World War, but President Roosevelt asked him to come back and be one of the 5 to create the UN. So we had people who were in the world, and we're seeing there must be some ways to organize ourselves differently to see about addressing some of the global issues, global problems. And as we've come out of that Second World War period, Minnesota became a place where many people came as refugees, and many people came looking for a new way of living and a better way of life. But we also became a people who traveled and went around the world. My organization, Global Minnesota, was born in 1951 as a small welcoming committee for students coming from around the world. They wanted to make sure that they had a good experience, they were warmly welcomed, and that when they went back home, they would remember Minnesota warmly. That also gave us an international perspective. So some things have continued. For example, we have a huge number of international students each and every year. Our students go overseas. But we also have addressed global problems because we became more educated. Center for Victims of Torture, this was the first one in North America, was planted here in Minnesota, treating people who were subject to torture. And then ultimately, many of those people stayed, and we built huge communities. There's something over 50,000 people here from Ethiopia, and that's how that originally happened. American Refugee Committee, now called Alight, another one of those humanitarian organizations based here, because there's a strong generosity here, able to help provide financial resources. But there's also a kind of idealism, and there's a way that our young people want to be engaged globally. So we were, for thousands of years, attracting people for a variety of reasons to come to this place. And in the past few hundred years, people in particular from all over the world have been attracted to here, and they've brought a global mindedness that is married to their personal values. And those combination of things has made it a special place to do things. For a period of time, I worked, helped create a nonprofit, Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. And we studied as much as we could what was going on in world trade. And we realized there were new movements. There was a fair trade movement. And we were the organization that signed the letter of agreement to bring the fair trade label to the United States. And it was just part of the pattern of Minnesota thinking about a problem. How could we do something better that affected people around the planet, looking for solutions, and then being part of the solution? And I think This is a kind of a deep-seated feeling here that even at the most fundamental level, like something like the creation of hospitals and community schools and religious organizations, we're people that believe in kindness, and we know that we often have to be well organized to deliver on that kindness. And so this is part of not just that we have beliefs and hopes and dreams and visions of a better world, but we have the knowledge that we have to get ourselves organized to help make that better world. As you can see, I'm passionate about this beautiful place I get to call home. And I would love it someday if any or all of you could come here and visit, and I could take and show you our state capitol and take you to the headwaters of the Mississippi where you can walk across it. But today we just have a chance to connect like this over Zoom digitally. And I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to brag a little bit about this beautiful, wonderful place I get to call home. Thank you again.
Minnesota, and the Twin Cities especially, is a cosmopolitan state, welcoming immigrants from all over the world. Minnesota has the largest Somali population in the United States, with roughly 70,000 Somali immigrants calling the state home. In addition, Minnesota is home to one of the largest Hmong populations in the country. More than 66,000 Hmong live here. According to the Minnesota Historical Society, the Hmong began coming to Minnesota in 1975 as refugees from the destructive wars that had ravaged their homelands in Laos. Many Somali immigrants also came to Minnesota to escape unstable political systems and civil war. Job opportunities and infrastructure to support immigrants are two big reasons why so many Somalis have traveled to the North Star State. And our diverse demographics are expected to remain strong. Data from the state of Minnesota predicts populations of color will grow by more than 1 million residents between 2018 and 2053, exceeding 1/3 of the total population.
Hi, my name is Ron Feldman, and I'm the first vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. And I am extremely excited to be here today with the Global Alliance for Banking on Values annual meeting. First, a little bit about the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. We are one of 12 Federal Reserve banks, and with the Board of Governors, that makes up the central bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve System. And in our district are the states of Montana, North and South Dakota, Minnesota, and parts of Wisconsin and Michigan. And for those of you familiar with the United States, that's basically the upper Midwest, a huge portion of it. And I am excited to speak here, particularly with Dave Reiling and Sunrise Bank asking me to participate. When I think of Sunrise and David, I think of really continuous improvement to come up with new financial products and services to serve the broadest range of our communities here in the 9th District and beyond. It's just great to be associated with anything that David and Sunrise and the Alliance are doing. And when you think of that kind of work, that work of really empowering communities, making sure that people can be the best that they can be, you might not think about central banks. You might not think about what we're up to and how that relates to your mission. And I want to talk just a little bit today about how we are, in fact, not just technocrats that are talking about things that sound abstract, like price stability, but they're actually engaged in the same mission in many ways that you are. So let me talk a little bit about a major effort across the Federal Reserve System that makes this point, and then I'll talk a little bit more about 3 efforts we have at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. And again, I should say as I move on, I'm really speaking for myself here and not speaking on behalf officially for the Federal Reserve System. In August of 2020, the chair of the Federal Reserve System, Jay Powell, announced the outcome of an 18-month review of the Federal Reserve's monetary policy framework. And this was a very important review because it led to changes in what's called the Fed's longer run goals and monetary policy strategy. And that's a document that lays out the foundation for how we carry out monetary policy. And I'm not going to go into the technical details of the changes that were made, but I want to talk a little bit about the intent and the motivation for it. And I'm going to quote a little bit from the discussion that Chair Powell had when he rolled it out. He noted that the expansion that we had before COVID started was delivering, and this is a quote, delivering life-changing gains for many individuals, families, and communities, particularly at the lower end of the income spectrum. And then he went on to say that many who had been left behind for too long were finding jobs, benefiting their families and communities, and increasing the productive capacity of our economy. Sort of a key motivation for our look at the framework under which we conduct monetary policy really aligns very well with what the Alliance is trying to do. And at the end of the rollout, the chair said that these technical changes that we're going to engage in would, in the conducting of monetary policy, and I quote, we will remain highly focused on fostering a strong labor market as possible for the benefit of all Americans. And I want to emphasize the all there, for the benefit of all Americans. And that's really critical to thinking about what we're doing here at the Minneapolis Fed. In 2019, I had the pleasure of leading our effort to redefine and be clear about what our mission was. We serve the public by pursuing a growing economy and a stable financial system that works for all of us. And we spent a lot of time really enforcing the for all of us. What do we mean? We're explicitly talking about communities and families and individuals who maybe have not benefited as much as they should from the economy and the financial system. And again, I'm linking back the work of the central bank to the work that the Alliance is doing, where we're trying to lift up communities who have many assets, but maybe don't have the income and other things that they need to really participate as fully as they would like to and as we all want them to. So how do we make this real? How do we make our mission something that's supportive, I think, in many ways of what the Alliance is doing? I'm going to give 3 examples. One great skill that we have and one real talent of the Federal Reserve System is just the analytical ability that we can bring to so many different issues, where you have maybe more economists working at the Federal Reserve System than any other entity in the United States. And we've taken those talents at our bank to focus on the set of issues that I think the Alliance is also working on. So at the Minneapolis Fed, for example, we've set up what we call the Opportunity and Inclusive Growth Institute. And the sole purpose of this is to take our research talent and try to answer questions. Why are some groups not benefiting as much of the other groups from the economy and from the financial system? So for example, why in the United States are the unemployment rates for Black Americans almost always twice as high as it is for white Americans? We've also set up the Center for Indian Country Development. That's a group that's using applied research to try to work with Native nations in the country to figure out how can we bring those skills, what we have, what the central bank has to offer to advance the same set of issues that Native nations think are important for their people and their communities. So the point is, we are first taking our analytical skills and our research capabilities to try to focus and identify and fix some of the same issues that you're working on. A second tool that we have, I think, is our ability to drive public discussion. And in Minneapolis, where Sunrise is based, we are also trying to drive this discussion, recognizing the real issues of systemic racism that have been present for decades, but were really brought to light in our community with the killing of George Floyd. I want to talk a little bit about a series that we've started with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and Atlanta called Race in the Economy. And now all of the Federal Reserve banks, all 12 of them, are working on this. So what is this series trying to accomplish? And if you don't mind, I'm going to read a little bit explicitly from our website, where I would encourage you to go and take a look at this work about what we're trying to do. It says, racism forms the foundation of inequality in our society, and it threatens our economy and limits economic opportunity for people of color. All 12 district banks of the Federal Reserve System are partnering to highlight the implications of racism in the United States and identify solutions. The Reserve Banks will host a series of virtual events to examine the ways in which structural racism manifests itself in America and advance actions to dismantle structural racism. And for many organizations, perhaps this doesn't sound like anything new, but for a central bank, I think it makes the point that we are focused on these issues of inequality and trying to think about how we can use our tools to address it. And then finally, in Minneapolis, when we're engaged, each of the Reserve Bank presidents participates in the setting of monetary policy in the United States. And our Reserve Bank president, President Neil Kashkari, has been advocating for an expansionary monetary policy that we think brings the for all part of our mission statement to bear, to make sure that labor markets are generating jobs for everyone who wants it. let me summarize the quick journey we've been on together. First, I really hope your annual meeting goes very well. I just want to thank Sunrise for everything they're going to do in the future and everything they've done for our community to date. And then just leave you with the message that the Central Bank of the United States and the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis are really committed to the sets of issues that you're dealing with for communities, individuals, and families. How do we support them, and how do we have them have as fulfilling life as they can? Thanks very much, and please stay well.
Greetings to the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. Thank you for all that you are doing around the world. In this time of extraordinary economic, social, and environmental challenges, the work that you are doing is vitally important. And thank you for Sunrise Banks for this opportunity to share some thoughts about climate change in Minnesota and what the state of Minnesota is doing to address this existential threat. My name is Patrick Hamilton, and I'm the Director of Global Change Initiatives at the Science Museum of Minnesota. Overlooking the Mississippi River in downtown St. Paul, the capital of Minnesota, the Science Museum of Minnesota is a natural history museum and also a science and technology center that serves over 1 million people annually through visits to our institution and through outreach to schools across the state and through our touring exhibits and large format films that are enjoyed by audiences across the United States and around the world. Some of you, no doubt, are wondering, where in the world is Minnesota? Well, it's in an intriguing location, located near the center of the North American continent and far removed from the moderating influence of oceans. It has a climate characterized by extremes. Winters can be quite cold because there are no mountain barriers to inhibit the flow of dry, frigid Canadian Arctic air southward into Minnesota. And summer days also can be quite hot and humid as warm, moist air flows up the Mississippi River Valley from the Gulf of Mexico. Despite a climate characterized by changeability, evidence of climate change is already appearing over and above the day-to-day fluctuations in our weather. Our Minnesota winters are trending toward becoming warmer. And you might think this is a good thing, but insect populations long kept in check by our frigid winter temperatures are now exploding in large numbers and killing large tracts of Minnesota's forests. Minnesota sits at the transition between the wet United States and the arid West. And under climate change, Minnesota has been trending toward becoming wetter. And again, you might think that this is a good thing. But superimposed upon this trend toward increasing annual precipitation are increasing incidences of highly destructive and very costly extreme rainfalls. Climate change is now the lived experience of everyone, everywhere, globally as well as in Minnesota. Minnesota, unfortunately, has not been meeting its goals for reducing its greenhouse gas emissions, but with one very promising exception. Over the last decade, large-scale wind and solar have plummeted so dramatically in cost that they now outcompete the burning of coal to generate electricity. As a result, every investor-owned utility in Minnesota has announced plans to close their coal-fired power plants, meaning that by 2035, at the latest, no more coal will be burned in Minnesota. Electricity is rapidly transitioning from formerly being our dirtiest source of energy to the cleaner, greener, low-carbon, even zero-carbon energy source of choice. As a result, the race is on to substitute electricity for the burning of fossil fuels in transportation, buildings, and agriculture. With the rapid plummeting in the burning of coal in Minnesota, transportation is now the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. But Metro Transit, the largest mass transit company in Minnesota, just 2 years ago announced plans to replace its entire fleet with electric-powered buses. And the state of Minnesota is pursuing clean car rules similar to those on the books in 12 other states that would mandate that vehicle manufacturers market their cars, their zero emissions and electric vehicles in Minnesota. After transportation, the energy to heat, cool, and power our buildings is the next biggest source of carbon emissions in Minnesota. But interest is growing rapidly in the use of electric-powered heat pumps to heat and cool our buildings and to produce domestic hot water. The electric-powered heat pump in the basement of my home is far more energy efficient than its natural gas predecessor. And a startup company spun off from the University of Minnesota has developed new ways of using the ground to heat and cool buildings that is much more cost-effective and energy efficient than any of its predecessors. After buildings, agriculture is our third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. 40% of all the corn grown in Minnesota is used to produce ethanol that is then blended with gasoline. But 1 acre of solar can produce 19 times more energy than the same acre of land used to grow corn to produce ethanol. And if you see the ground underneath solar panels with pollinator-friendly perennials, not only do you get zero carbon electricity, but you get carbon sequestration, you get protection from extreme rainfalls, you get more pollinator and wildlife habitat, and you can even get food in the form of meat from sheep used to manage the vegetation under solar panels. The University of Minnesota is on the cusp of developing a whole new set of perennial crops, such as kernza, which is a delicious perennial variety of wheat that not only protects the soil from climate change, but actually takes carbon out of the atmosphere and stores it back in the soil. So here we are. We now live on a human-dominated planet. The future of Earth will be determined by human decision-making, either by default or by design, either by accident or by intention. So let's imagine, design, and realize the more equitable economic, employment, educational, and environmental future that we all want. And I greatly appreciate the opportunity to address an audience committed and engaged in doing exactly that. Thank you. Miigwech, tak skalduhal, dankeschön, merci, gracias, grazie, efaristo, asante, dakuyu, arigato, dan terima kasih. Goodbye.
Minnesota is known for its winters, and single digits are common in its coldest months. Sometimes we find ourselves shoveling in April and May. But the frigid temps are part of our winter traditions. In Minnesota, we enjoy posting up on a frozen lake to fish for walleye. We sled and ski down snow-covered hills, and afterwards we warm up inside with a cup of cocoa and lefse. You might even catch us driving, yes, you heard that right, on a frozen body of water. But winter here doesn't last forever. Minnesota experiences all 4 seasons. We breathe a sigh of relief when spring arrives and jump for joy at the first sign of summer. When the sun's out, so are we, enjoying Minnesota's beautiful outdoors and spending time on our lakes and rivers. Fall doesn't disappoint either. The leaves change across the state and make for gorgeous photo ops and breathtaking day trips. Yes, us Minnesotans know our way around a snowblower, but the winter months don't define us. The cold scares some off, but that's okay. That means there's more for us.
Greetings from Rochester, Minnesota, home to Mayo Clinic, the #1 healthcare provider in the world. My name is Patrick Sieb, and I'm with Destination Medical Center, the largest economic development initiative in Minnesota's history. I am so pleased to be part of this extraordinary event with leaders from across the globe, and particularly my colleagues in Minnesota. And I'm so inspired by the work of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values and its core mission to use finance to deliver sustainable economic, social, and environmental development with a focus on helping individuals fulfill their potential and build stronger communities. Destination Medical Center was born of the idea that Rochester, through collaboration, partnership, and innovation, could achieve its full potential as America's city for health. An authentic claim, one that no other city can rightfully make. Here, patients and visitors from around the world interact with the best physicians and healthcare providers while being welcomed with a Midwest sensibility of openness, warmth, and hospitality. Like you at GABV, we do our work through a lens of social, economic, and environmental sustainability. And moreover, we understand that through the success of individuals, we can build a more vibrant and thriving community. It is through this lens that we steward the use of nearly $600 million of public resources designed to invest in the public infrastructure so necessary for community growth. We are led by a volunteer board of directors who provide guidance and policy, and a staff which wakes up every morning with the goal of making Rochester a better place to live, do business, and raise a family. And we work alongside municipal colleagues and other civic organizations and an active citizenry. We're proud of our progress over our first 5 years, but humbled by lessons learned and passionate about opportunities before us. None more pronounced than growing into a post-pandemic future. Let me take a moment to share some of the building blocks of success that form the foundation for our future. We set a goal of attracting new investments from outside of Minnesota into our community. In the first 5 years, we saw nearly $1 billion of new development, much of the capital coming from outside of Minnesota. This has provided a tremendous boost to the local job market, especially among those in the construction trades. Now, we look for ways to ensure that local businesses have opportunities to share in Rochester's prosperity. We set targets for women and minority-owned businesses in DMC construction projects. We met and in some cases exceeded our goals, in part because of the hands-on effort to facilitate business participation. Now we turn our attention to ensuring that a more just and equitable approach in all economic development decisions, like hiring community co-designers, tapping into their lived experiences to help shape all public infrastructure investments, or targeted outreach to support minority entrepreneurs. We developed energy and sustainability initiatives which have measurably reduced our carbon footprint, and now every new development raises the bar for the next. But we work towards a 21st century approach to sustainability and community resilience with community-originated goals, integration of health and wellness, and the physical and social world. We have begun to invest in generational public infrastructure improvements like new sewers and water lines and broadband to meet the coming needs of the community. Now we do so with an eye toward future-proofing our city with universal design and assistive technology that allows every resident of every age and ability to fully realize their potential and participate in our community. We have successfully attracted life science and technology companies from around the world, many of whom simply want to be close enough to rub elbows with the scientists of Mayo Clinic. Now we double down on supporting local entrepreneurs and startups. We have told Rochester's story to businesses, investors, and developers. Now we make the same case to individuals and families. After all, in a world where you can work from anywhere, why not Rochester, Minnesota? Why not Rochester? A city that fared better than any during the pandemic and is poised for a quickest recovery. Today, more than 25% of the population vaccinated for COVID-19. A city where you can choose to live downtown and walk to work, or live in a more distant neighborhood and choose transportation options like public transit. A city whose downtown saw the growth of new restaurants and public spaces in spite of the COVID disruption. A city that is leveraging the innovation of its major employer to diversify and grow the economy. A city committed to racial justice and equity, the first designated intercultural city in the United States. A city with visionary leaders, an active citizenry, a renewed commitment to collaboration, and the tools and resources to get things done. In her Senate confirmation hearing, Treasury Secretary Yellen said, and I quote, "It's also important for America to invest in our infrastructure, invest in our workers, invest in research and development, the things that make our economy grow faster and make it more competitive," end quote. This is Rochester's story with one more twist. Mayo Clinic has an outsized presence in our community from which we benefit in so many ways. Perhaps most importantly, from its legacy of innovation, its scientific and evidence-based approach to decision-making, and its culture, summed up in one phrase: the needs of the patient come first. Rochester enters 2021 from a position of strength and with positive momentum. We at Destination Medical Center are honored to work with so many to realize a shared vision for a strong, vital, and equitable community, ensuring that the needs of the community come first. Thank you.
Minnesota is known for a lot, and it has no shortage of quirks. Does hot dish ring a bell? Here are a handful of fast facts on Minnesota. Don't you know? 1. Minnesota, despite its moniker of Land of 10,000 Lakes, actually claims nearly 12,000 lakes in total. The state's lakes and rivers cover more than 2.5 million acres of land. 2. Minnesota leads the country in turkey production, and according to the United States Department of Agriculture, was responsible for the production of 40 million turkeys in 2019. 3. Darwin, Minnesota is home to the world's biggest ball of twine created by a single person. The ball is 12 feet in diameter and weighs more than 17,000 pounds. 4. The Minnesota State Fair, held each summer in the Twin Cities, is one of the largest in the country, welcoming millions of visitors annually. 5. Minnesota's biggest city, Minneapolis, is known as one of the most bikeable in the country, with 98 miles of bike lanes and 101 miles of off-street bikeways and trails. Minnesota has a lot to be proud of, and we're happy to have you here. You betcha!